Hey everybody, it's Tripl-L coming in to do Time Paradox Ghost Rider Chapter 13. Just a quick discussion on the chapter itself. Uh, it's this video was by request, so we're just gonna go here and we're gonna talk about Time Paradox Ghost Rider. Didn't have time to do a roundup, but hopefully I'll do this and Chainsaw Man. And yeah, so I just want to say I am recording this on a Saturday, and bit of news about Time Paradox Ghost Rider, a bit of unfortunate news has dropped. It's become knowledge, and I was just looking at the Viz comments because I'm very active on the Viz comments for Time Paradox Ghost Rider, and I was just seeing the comments, and I was just seeing good old failings of human nature just in real time, and it's just, I want to say so much about those comments, but I'm gonna hold it, gonna just keep it under control. I don't want to say anything about those comments on this video that can be easily tracked. Instead, I will say it on the live stream where it will be lost in between many rambles. So if you are part of the live stream crew, well, I don't even have to say like, I hope you'll be there. No, you'll probably be there. But yeah, so if you're in the live stream crew, I'll make sure to wait for you whenever we want to talk about Time Paradox Ghost Rider on the live stream. But anyway, what we're going to do here, we're going to talk about Chapter 13, because Chapter 13, even though it is in a compromised state in respect to the rest of Time Paradox Ghost Rider, even though it is in a compromised state, there are things going on here that complete a story. There is still, if we're talking about a story being rushed, this thing is being rushed while maintaining some of its integrity, which is a little bit different compared to what happened to Shokugeki no Soma. So, props to that, but also Shokugeki no Soma had way more plot threads to deal with, but at the very least for Time Paradox, there was a very neat story occurring in Chapter 13. Now, Chapter 13 comes into the game with quite a few interesting factors. We have Teppei's determination, we have just the mechanisms of the timeless world, we have his repeated determination, and the thing people really are wowed by is the amount of days that Teppei spent in there. But, beyond what we just see in the overt sense in the manga, there is still a message about Teppei's character in terms of the strength of his character and the strength of his convictions. So, first, I want to talk about the days in. Now, as a mechanism, Teppei spends 34 years inside of this world, right? And what was really interesting to me early on was that people found that to be the incredible thing about Teppei. But when I look at the situation where this guy spent 34 years straight working on his various manga, which also might be very funny if these manga are actually just very terrible and he just doesn't realize it because, you're biased to your own perspective. But maybe. But yeah, sorry, birdies. Moving away from that. What was interesting here is that what this 34 years does, it expresses Teppei's never give up personality, that very classic shonen trait. My thing with that, however, is that, it's an impressive spectacle, but that message that Teppei is a person that doesn't give up, I already understood that. I understood that from, I think, chapter 12 or chapter 11, whichever chapter had him talking to the robot. I understood it from that moment. And here's what it ultimately comes down to. The guy spent 35 years, roughly, in a world where there was no time. In this world, his needs didn't need to get met. He was just a guy working single-mindedly on this project. But when you think about what occurred with the guy... Someone's annoyed. Anyway, where was I? Okay, just going back, he was in a world that was, all his needs were met. It was a timeless world. He didn't get hungry. He didn't need to sleep. When you look at the other timeline, you see a Teppei that did not have the best life. He had to go back to live with his parents, but even then, he still worked on his stuff. He never gave up, and 10 years later, he was able to get a one-shot that inspired Aino into the magazine. See, that's also a Teppei that expresses that he doesn't give up. And ultimately, for me, I'm not all that impressed with this guy surviving 35 years in a timeless world. I mean, yeah, like it's very impressive just in what the manga tells us, and it's impressive in concept. But I relate and I respect the guy who kept going even while he had to balance his needs uh, while he was working on his project. So in other words, I respect the original. Well, for me, like I think it's just an issue of relating. I relate to the original Tepe more because I think it's much more impressive that even though you're dealing with the harshness of life, even though you're dealing with every day being reminded that you failed because you're living back at home with your parents, you took a regular job, even though you're dealing with all the stresses of needing to have food, shelter, family, and food, shelter, family, pay the bills, all that kind of stuff. Even though you're dealing with all those stresses, you still were able to produce this work that was ultimately able to inspire someone else and get the story going. So for me, that's the thing. Like the moment that you tell me that Tepe can do that in his regular life with all the regular influences, the guy surviving 35 years just doing his manga, that's a-okay. That's a-okay. I respect a lot more the guy that did it even though he was losing out in life, compared to the guy that just well, it's the same guy, but like that's the first thing. I found the initial Tepe to be a little bit more relatable. But the thing here to really take away is that these two instances of never give up, what it really does is just show a different aspect. There's different things being tested in these two scenarios. And the reality is, once you have a Tepe that will spend 10 years losing until he eventually wins, you're going to have a Tepe that can spend 35 years just working on the ultimate manga. And at the same time, if you have a Tepe that can spend 35 years working on the ultimate manga, you probably would have a Tepe that can deal with the harshness of life. So it's just really an issue of what exactly does a person relate to and what does a person find more impressive. Another thing to keep in mind is that I've read a lot of Shonen Jump stuff, so I have a lot more of a cynical view on these giant abstract. It's not an abstract gesture, but it's a little bit more nebulous. It's a little bit more of an extraordinary gesture to prove someone is a never give up personality. Now, in regards to the days spent, I do want to point something else out, is that we are saying 34 years straight, but if you think about it, what Tepe ultimately does here would be probably the equivalent if we were just to do a flat doubling of 68 years. And the reason I say that is because when you consider like a regular day, you gotta get up, you gotta eat your food, you gotta pay your bills. So you probably have a job doing something somewhere. You have to go to sleep. You have to make sure you go to the bathroom multiple times. You have to probably have a little bit of a social life. So you imagine it. You could probably assume that you take out take out like 12 hours out of your day, and when you take that out, you double the number, so that's how you get 68. And even when you consider that, even if you say, well, no, maybe Tepe only takes 4 hours to sleep, if you play that game, well, we can just pull out real life examples. Oda's been doing that, and now Oda's on a special schedule that's enforced by Shonen Jump. You can't play that game with the human body. The human body will eventually crap out if you're not taking care of it. So I do feel very confident in saying that this is the equivalent of 68 years of real-time effort, which is also like pretty impressive just to think about. Like, yeah, like what you ultimately take away from this is that Tepe would not be able to do this. The limitations of the human body would have like come in check. But this does tell us something though, that given time, Tepe will be able to reach Aino. And this leads me to the next very interesting thing about the chapter, in that this is ultimately a comparison between Tepe and Aino, and in some ways, Tepe comes out the winner. There is a one-to-one comparison happening here, and the manga is saying that Tepe is a winner. Now, I want to be very careful here because I don't want to disparage Aino. What's important to understand here is that the manga around chapter 2 or 3, it wanted to establish that Aino forced that her and Tepe were relatively the same, right? So we have that commonality that they are similar people. That's why we can compare them. Now, what occurs here is that there is a very simple game of sacrifices and pros and cons going on. Aino is the kind of person... Oh, that's an alarm. Aino is the kind of person who sacrifices a lot of things, right? She sacrifices her social life. She stays in her room. She lives with her mom. She's also doesn't have very much confidence. That's why she needed Tepe to instigate her. She doesn't have that kind of tenacity like he has in that particular regard. So she sacrifices all these elements, and in return, if we think about it like, like someone like was on a stat screen and they were giving themselves stats at the moment of their conception. In return, she's super incredibly gifted with manga, right? That's how she gets to be her best manga self. And unfortunately, because she's lacking things, she ends up overworking herself. She has too much of a fixation. Teppei, on the other hand, is much more well adjusted. So what that ultimately means is that he lost points in the manga creation process, but he has all the other factors that he needs to really be at Aino's level. He just doesn't have that the head start that talent gives you. So what you ultimately end up here with the chapter is that the thing is saying that Teppei is capable of reaching Aino. We know that they are similar if he is given enough time. Teppei in the original timeline can kind of prove that a little bit since he's the one that inspired Aino, but also here we see it proven in that he gets to the end. Now, what's really interesting here is that there are two comparisons to Aino that occur in the chapter that are very aggressive. One of the comparisons happens at page 18. Look at Teppei's room. See this organization? This is one of the big statements that says Teppei is more well-adjusted at Aino. Aino's lost a lot of skills, and the comparison here is that Teppei has all his papers stacked and organized compared to Aino's room, which is just an absolute goddamn mess. So this makes more sense because Teppei, he's out in the world. He's working in the world. He's taking all these jobs. He's figuring things out. Even when he has to stop and go back to work and take it easier in the original timeline, he's still doing it in an organized way. Teppei has the skills to survive life and also work. That's what you ultimately take away here. Now, the other thing that is saying that Teppei is superior to Aino in this regard, or in another regard, is at the end of the chapter, Teppei returns a little kid his ice cream cone that had fallen out. Now, you might be saying, well, why is that particularly strange? It's in chapter 1. In chapter 1, while he was on the way to Shueisha, while he was on the way to do what it was that he wanted to do, he still took the time to help a kid. I think he climbed into a tree or something to get a kid. He was helping a little kid. And at the end of the chapter, he's still helping the little kid. What does that tell you? Well, you have to look at Aino. Aino's problem is that she forgot why she was doing things. She kind of forgot. She forgot a sense of her. She forgot who she was. What this is saying that even though Teppei went through the process of creating the ultimate manga, he still has his sense of self. The person that helps that little boy get that cone back in his hand is the same person that started this started the series, except now he is a bit better at manga. That's the only big difference. So what you have there is also a comparison of the journeys. Aino, in pursuing her ultimate craft, had to sacrifice parts of herself such that she ultimately paid the ultimate sacrifice. Whereas Teppei, all he needed was the resource of time, and he'll get there. He got there, and he got there without losing out on his personality. He got there without losing sight of what he was doing and why he was doing it. Teppei stayed strong and resolute. Now again, it's hard to play the one-to-one comparison. When we isolate the situations well enough, we can definitely say Teppei is superior in these particular regards. At the end of the day, Teppei needs time to create this ultimate work. Aino, in order to create the ultimate work, has to sacrifice a lot of things. Those are the trade-offs for these two people who are, according to Aino, more or less similar. And I guess also according to the robot, they're more or less similar. But that was what was really interesting about Time Paradox Ghost Rider for this chapter. Now, for the rest of the chapter, it's just like a lot of intensity of drawing. And in terms of the little details, I thought it was really cool that Teppei was, when you look at the books he was looking at, it looks like he's looking at a book about animals, he's looking at historical figures, he's looking at Japanese history, he's looking at world history. The man, at the end of the series, is going to be a living encyclopedia. Like, I am actually legitimately curious I'm curious as to whether or not he's going to keep that knowledge once the stop time stops or continues, but it'd be kind of cheap to pull that away from him. But then again, this is a future that was never supposed to happen, and honestly, with that robot showing up, everything's just been thrown away. It's one more thing that's really interesting is that there was a clue about 11 in one of the earlier chapters, like Junie, I think, when the Teppei asked the robot who it was. And it's just kind of interesting that clue hasn't found its answer yet. Now, one more thing to point out is that Tepe has a lot of paper, and I can only imagine that some local store in his neighborhood has just... It must... They must have a paper shortage. But yeah, Time Paradox Ghost Rider, you know, once it started getting rushed with the robot revealing itself, that was it. Shit was in trouble. It was gonna be rough. Once we saw Aino die, it was gonna be rough. So, you know, at the end of the day, for what they did, I'm actually very, very impressed that they were still able to bookend so beautifully. So that's definitely props for the series. But yeah, that was Time Paradox Ghost Rider chapter 13. Let me know what you thought down below. A lot of it was also just Tepe like drawing stuff, and that's not all that impressive. Like, you can, it's actually kind of funny. I'm just got 4 pages of just watching the guy struggle and talk about how he's struggling. Good stuff. Good stuff. Anyway, everyone, let me know what you thought down below, and until next time, I hope you have a great day. I'm gonna do a very quick Chainsaw Man thing, so keep an eye out for that.